これよりパネルディスカッション2風化させ
Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to begin the second presentation, the panel discussion, Leprosy, a History That Must Not Be Forgotten. Our panelists are Mr. Yasuji Hirasawa, member of the steering committee of the National Hansen's Disease Museum, Japan, and Mr. Kazuhisa Kuroo, chief curator of the National Hansen's Disease Museum, Japan, and Dr. Arturo Cunanan, chief of the Quirón Sanatorium and General Hospital, the Philippines, Mr. Artur Custodio Moreira de Souza, a national coordinator of the movement for the reintegration of persons affected by Hansen's disease. And our facilitator is Dr. Josephine Robertson, lecturer in writing at the University of Queensland, Australia. So, Dr. Robertson, please.
So what is history?
それでは歴史とは何かと。歴史は過去のことかもしれない。または過去の研究かもしれない。時には過去は何を意味するかということの研究であるかもしれない。
Is it so that we can foresee the future? Well, history is not automatically a good guide for action for the future. Understanding the past does not help us know what may happen in the future. But history is useful for understanding. The historian comes to understand what has happened and why. He gains human understanding rather than instructions for how to act. History is inescapable. It is the study of the past and the legacies of the past in the present. These documents here record the lives of small children born to leprosy-affected people in the leprosy colony on Quirón Island in the Philippines. Each record, with its photos, records a life history in microcosm. To preserve these documents is to preserve the story of many individual lives. So what is this history? The absence of a cure until 1981, as well as the stigma associated with leprosy, meant that for centuries, leprosy was considered a disease apart. Because of the stigma and suffering experienced by individuals, it would be very easy to make this very emotional and to generate a great deal of pathos. But leprosy is a disease like any other, just one among many diseases. For most of its history, leprosy has been a disfiguring disease. When your physical identity changes, it is easy to feel as if your essential identity, even your humanity, has been affected. People not only experience changes to their physical identity, they also inherited the burden of a distasteful representational history. They became victims of a poorly understood disease that carried a heavy social stigma. At the first leprosy conference in Berlin in 1897, delegates concluded that isolation was the best means of preventing the spread of the disease. And in Bergen in 1909, this policy was affirmed. Large colonies were established in Molokai, Hawaii, on Quirón in 1906. In Japan, legislation was introduced to isolate paupers and vagrants with leprosy. In Spain, the hospital and agricultural colony of Fontillas was established in 1907. In the USA, in 1917, a national leprosarium was established. By 1941, in Japan, there were 10 state-run sanatoria. Between 1930 and 1945, a nationwide network of leprosy colonies and preventorio were established. But these were only a few of hundreds of places, asylums, colonies, lazarets, sanitaria, hospitals, where hundreds of thousands of people were isolated. In 1941, Dr. Guy Fadgett found that the sulfone-promin inhibited the progress of leprosy. In 1948, Robert Cochrane gave small doses by mouth in Chingleput, South India. Then it became possible to treat people in their homes and villages. And at this time, 10 to 12 million people were estimated to be suffering from leprosy worldwide. Meanwhile, people with leprosy were fighting for their dignity and their right to be heard. An outstanding example of resistance took place in Curable. Stanley Stein, Sydney Morris Levison, began the newsletter, the 66 Star. Increasingly, the people of Curable were listened to, and in 1948, the Leprosy Congress in Havana banned the use of the word leper and called for the disease to be known clinically as Hansen's disease. By 1984, WHO was able to recommend a combination of drugs, multi-drug therapy. The Nippon Foundation funded the supply worldwide. Now Novartis provides it. So no person in need of treatment should be denied the cure. In 1991, the World Health Assembly declared the goal of the elimination of leprosy as a public health policy. Today, leprosy is just like any other disease, worthy of speedy diagnosis and effective treatment. History is as much about imagination as it is about the facts. If you cannot imagine yourself finding out that a member of your family has been diagnosed, that you have been diagnosed, that you have fled in terror from someone accused of having the disease, that you have written letters of complaints to the authorities about people with the disease, that you have agitated for better conditions, for decent food, for the right to marry, that you have had your right to have children taken away from you, that you have undergone sterilisation so that you could live something approaching a normal life, that you have nursed people with leprosy. If you cannot feel with others, then all you can do is judge them and condemn them, or praise them and over-adulate them. All people and peoples are living histories. History is not the story of strangers, aliens from another realm. It is the story of us, had we been born a little earlier or in a different place. History is memory. We have to remember what it is like to be a person touched by leprosy if we dare, and we should dare. History is not an abstraction, it is the enemy of abstraction. So the past is in the present. There are still people today who still live in far-flung leprosy colonies. There are people today who still bear the extreme stigmata of facial disfiguration, who are blind and have deformed hands and feet. There are families today that were ruptured irrevocably because of leprosy and the public health policies against the disease. There are people today who were removed from their parents, either because they were diagnosed with the disease in early childhood or because they were removed from leprosy-infected parents so that they would not become infected. There are people today who were sterilised or persuaded to undergo abortions so that they could have a partner and live something approaching a normal life. So understanding the linkages between past and present is absolutely basic for a good understanding of the condition of being human. It is not just useful, it is essential. So now I would like to ask our first two speakers to come and speak about the consequences of these policies. Mr. Hirasawa and Mr. Karu, if you would like to come to speak.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you for introduction. Hirasawa is my name. At the age of 40, I developed leprosy. And then a doctor at the Tokyo University told me, you will be cured within a year. Then in 1941, I was admitted to National Sanatorium Tama Zenshoen. After the New Year holiday, I went there, hoping that I could return home very soon. However, the sanatorium was not heaven. I didn't feel very happy. There is a crematory. There was a temple. And once you are diagnosed with the disease, it meant that there was no way out. You need to be cremated in order to leave the place. So I grown up in the military Japan. We called Americans barbaric, and we practiced to kill our enemies. And we had nothing to eat. So we had to fight for our lives. And then war ended. And I was surprised. Americans, that we saw them as enemies, in their country they developed treatment of the disease, but which was not available in Japan. In Japan, patients of leprosy were to die in the leprosarium. So we decided to initiate a movement. We are not prisoners. We went on fast and we went on strike. However, the government would not provide us with treatment. My mother sold the piece of land to generate some money to buy the treatment. However, the prescription was wrong, so I suffered after effect. And then I got married, and then but I was not able to have a child, and I had to go through sterilization, just like animals. But we appealed that we wanted to go outside. And we gathered our power to resist the movement. However, within Leprosarium, we were not allowed to have meetings. Police came in to stop us having meetings. People said that leprosy cannot be cured. Families should also go through sterilization, and they should be arrested. That's what they said. However, we realized that we had to continue to fight. That was the lesson we got from our experience. Towards the end of 1950s, tuberculosis, mentally retarded people. There are many other disabled people. Together with them, we try to work together to improve the world for the disabled people. However, we faced a lot of discriminations. The when I visited the clinics treating tuberculosis, they sterilized everything in the facility. And also, I was not able to eat at their canteen. We drove around the Tokyo, and then I continued to develop disabilities. But then I came to think, if I cannot use my right hand, I use my left hand. If I cannot use my left hand, then I use my mouth to speak my mind. And if I cannot speak, I will get the help. And it is not a shame that you are disabled, but it is a shame that you give up on your attempts to do something. And in 1964, we created the autonomous meeting. And then people said, oh, they will not last for 3 days. However, we were very persistent. And then community members were critical to us. However, we did not think it was a good idea to repay unkindness by unkindness. And we, at a leprosarium, when cherry blossoms blossomed, people did not come to see the flowers saying those flowers are contaminated. But nowadays, people would come to enjoy our cherry blossoms, and some neighbors promised to have lunch with me. And then under the laws, we live and we receive pension, and our residence and our living conditions are managed by the legal requirements. But in order to protest the legal requirements, we went on strike in front of the Ministry of Health. And then when I visited City Council, people hated me because I continued to complain in order to improve the community. And then Dr. Sawada worked with us to improve the Tama Zensho and residents. At the Tokyo, at the City Council, they saw me as a minority, and they hated me for leaving the sanatorium. And they wondered why I continued to leave the sanatorium despite the discrimination. The full participation in the society and then the world of equality are the ones that we wanted. The Convention of the Equal Rights of the Disabled, the activities related to that convention were something that I got involved because I wanted to change the world. And then people, however, said that Mr. Hirasa looked too clever. Maybe he is part of the government and he tried to trick the leprosy-affected people. And then some people interrogated me for many hours. And they wondered whether I was working to protect the leprosy control prevention law. However, I cannot blame me for suspecting me. Under the bad and harmful leprosy control law, they continued to fight, and sometimes they suspected me as a member of the government side. And then with the Prince Mikasa and with the help of the members of the imperial family, we visited many places in Japan to collect and gather materials on leprosy, and then we established the museum. However, a lot of people ask me why you are trying to show those materials concerning leprosy. A lot of people were against the idea of museum, but in 1993 we opened our museum, which had a lot of impact on academia and on media. And then in 1996, the leprosy control law was abolished, and we won the lawsuit as well. And then a leprosy basic law instead was introduced. Whatever the ideas the people may have, I believe we can work together as the same human beings. Every one of us is given a life. I think that is a miracle. As one of the global citizens, we all need to think about how we should live our lives. Every year, more than 5,000 children will come and see me. And I am popular amongst children, although I am not popular amongst adults. I see three issues right now. One is that in 11 countries in the world, we would like to establish the museum on leprosy materials with the help of Mr. Sasakawa, with the help of people who are here, and with the scholars. We would like to somehow build museums in 11 countries. And at the 13 leprosariums, we have museums. But there are only 2 museums that are funded by the government. One is our museum. And we would like the government to allocate sufficient human resources. And at the Ministry of Education, we are asking them to include leprosy in the school texts. The other day, I had a meeting with the director of Ministry of Education to file a petition towards that goal. Our lessons must be utilized. Our history must be utilized for the future society. I think joy is given birth through suffering, and I would like to hand down our history to the next generations. I cannot talk about my life within 5 minutes, but until 100 years old, for another 10 years, I'm determined to continue my activities. So I thank you in advance for your continuous support.
Thank you very much. We were given 10 minutes actually, but then he already used up more than 12 minutes. My time is running out. But let me just express one thing here. As he had mentioned that his pain should be also let the young generation people should know, and he said he would stay active until 100 years old. This is one of the very important and critical topic that he just addressed, because I would say that the recovery has to be something that is honorable for these people. But I think that this is the role of the young people who need to pass on to the young generation people. Earlier, we talked about the situation of nursing. And also Ms. Yamaguchi had mentioned, and also this was mentioned by Mr. Hirasawa himself as well. But one of the major difficult question that posed to us was that these people was not able to have their children. And I think that this is a sin of the people, the human beings, not only the government to be blamed of, but rather this is also, it's sinful in terms of the human being here living on this earth, not knowing all the details and the reality of how these affected people have experienced. Earlier, someone mentioned that this is like the legacy of the past, and also to pass the knowledge over to the young generation people. And I do agree so perfectly, because the Leprosy Museum has the exact role of that. And I would say that the government is also helpful because the victims of this leprosy had won this lawsuit. And I think that this is the challenge that we would have to pass on to the young people. And I myself had felt how important our responsibilities are. But I think that this is the topic that we would have to overcome in order to keep these memories alive all the way through to our ancestors. Now, he said that I think that there are some people sitting here who should be appointed to be the intangible national asset. And I would say that Mr. Hirasawa was also one of those as well. But then these people are at quite a elder age that once we lose them, there's no one who would pass on this story to the young people. And there are a lot of things and the knowledge, there are a lot of cultural assets around the world. And I think that by having that alone is not going to tell anything. And I think that the communication would only become possible with humans in place. And I think that we are given such role to take the record of how and what kind of experiences that people had went through so that this record would be passed on to the next generation people. So I would say that there has to be the stock, or I would say the warehouse of all these records and these information should be kept intact. And I also have my storage, which is completely filled with all the documents related to leprosy. So I would like to use this opportunity to urge all of you to pay more attention to this illness. If you think of the history of museums, in the past, it was more like the collection made by some affluent people like king and the queens of countries. However, when it comes to the leprosy museum, this is not to do with those affluent people's collected valuables, but rather this is more bottom up. People who experienced the stigma and discrimination, the marginal people who had worked really hard for this battle and created all the experience and also the knowledge to be passed on to the young people now exhibited in this museum. Therefore, those seeds would have to be raised into a big, big plant so that the young people would still recognize that there has been such past existed on this earth, which was quite important under the victimization of some of these people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to both of you. Dr. Kunanan, please, will come now and speak about the Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Robertson, Professor Mr. Sasakawa, Professor Kikuni, Mr. Tanami. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Mabuhay from the Philippines. How would you move this one? Okay. From Japan, let's go to the Philippines. I'm presenting about Culion, a history that must not be forgotten, as part of the sessions this afternoon. In 1901, an expedition was sent by the American authorities during part of the American colonization of the Philippines to look for areas for segregation as a colony for people affected by leprosy. Lo and behold, they found Culion as a most suitable place where to put people affected by leprosy all over the archipelago. It is based at a well-isolated, good anchorage, abundant water supply, and opportunities for livelihood activities. By 1902, the American authorities passed by executive order creating Culion Leper Colony as a leprosarium or as a colony for leprosy. It has a total land area of 150 square miles. It's located 200 miles southwest of Manila. and is located on the northernmost tip of the province of Palawan. I would like to present some important highlights on why the history of Culion should not be forgotten. And most importantly, the number one would be the segregations of lepers, quote unquote. At the beginning of the American colonizations of the Philippines in 1898, they find out that leprosy is an endemic disease in the archipelago. They believe it is highly communicable based on their own limitations in terms of leprosy epidemiology. During that time, after the Spanish regime, there is no organized program. There are very few leper asylums that were created and run by Spanish missionaries. And during that time, there was an estimated 25 to 30,000 leprosy cases in the country. Filipinos believe, and authorities, that leprosy is highly contagious, it is incurable, and the transmission is unknown, and there is no available preventive measures. As you all know, Americans are sanitarians, and by 1907, a law was passed providing for the compulsory segregations of patients in the whole country. The basis of this was that it's the best means, as recommended during the Berlin Congress and the Virgin Congress, that the best way to protect the healthy is to isolate the sick. It provides care for the sick, and it aims to control leprosy in the country. This is all where it began. From these photos, you can see the systematic collections and separations of patients from different islands of the Philippines were brought into San Lazaro Hospital, and they were accosted by soldiers. And the sanitary inspectors were given police powers to apprehend patients compulsorily. And after settling in San Lazaro Hospital, they were transported to Culion by virtue of the segregation law. And thus becomes the era of isolation and separations and making Culion a leper colony. It started in May 1906, where the first arrival of 300 patients were sent to Culion. It becomes a systematic, quote, leper collection trip until World War II, and an average of around 200 patients per trip at 2 to 3 months interval. Culion Leper Colony becomes a place of no return. Some 800 patients segregated in 1906. By 1910, it becomes 5,303. And by 1937, it became the biggest organized leprosarium in the world. Leprosy is an imported disease in the Culion Island, and the segregation law makes the Culion Leper Colony. It's a struggle to provide care and cure. It transformed the island into an island of living dead, as referred by patients. It's a paradise lost. Culion became an institution in 1906. It's a symbol of and an instrument of an ideal to control and protect control the disease and protect healthy individuals. It's a goal to be reached. It becomes a monument. It becomes a training ground, a big research laboratory. So this is photos of patients arriving in Culion from Manila. Photos when they're arriving on the shores of Culion Islands, and expeditions of photos in 1926. And people are placed on quarantine upon arrival in the island. Culion became the largest organized leper colony in 1907, as shown by the increasing numbers of residential houses at given point in time. It's also an area for research, a quest for cure, using charmugra oil and ethyl esters, creating or establishing injection clinics using ethyl ester with iodine of charmugra, supplying different parts of Asia for ethyl esters of charmugra. The establishment of Culion Leper Colony in 1906 is another milestone in the history of leprosy control in the Philippines. It moves from an organized leper colonies of settlements run by Jesuits and Franciscans or Dominican missionaries in Manila and Cebu during the Spanish period. Another highlights in Culion is the prohibitions of marriage up until 1910 with the no children policy. This has compounded the outcast status of patients and compounded the effects of isolation policy. They have provided certain basis for this policy that children should not be born of leprous parentage because they have a risk of developing leprosy, the speculation that leprosy is hereditary, and the limited resources to run the institution, and leprosy and pregnancy being strenuous to patients. After 1910, marriage was allowed, but the main problem now is what to do with the children. And thus, another milestone or another important history in Culion is the separations of children of leprous parentage. It's a separation, it's an isolation within an isolated island where Culion children born of leprous parentage are separated compulsorily from their parents. So children born of leprous parents are placed in a Balala nursery and being taken care of by surrogates, by nursemaids and religious sisters. Hundreds of these Culion children were placed into the Balala nursery before they're being sent to a welfare-built institutions in Manila. Before that, many of these children were sent for adoptions, and many of the parents, neither of the children, have known or had bonded already with their families. They have lost ties and have lost their identity of their parents. So this photo shows parents visiting their children in the Balala nursery on weekends. They cannot touch their children, only they can see it in front of a glass panel. Hundreds of these children grew in the nursery before they're sent home or being sent to welfare-built institution. Although leprosy and isolations has been marked in the institutions of colonies, there is an era where patients thrive and survive towards normalcy. Patients and residents of this institution, the settlers, build their lives and builds a community of man. So you can see people who had adjusted despite the isolations and the sacrifices and the struggle, build community of people, a community of man. Culion has been noted to have their own currency that can only be used within the island. Another mark of stigmatization. You can only use this inside the Culion Island. Patients inside the sanitaria or the colony struggles towards regaining dignity and humanity. Patients struggled to be normal amidst an abnormal environment, to live like normal people. One of the most distinguishing characteristics of Culion in terms of a colony is marriage and family. Having family of their own provided the continuing legacy of generations to know about what leprosy and what happens. Today, the population, 80% of the populations of Culion are from the first settlers who arrived in Culion in 1906 up to the 1940s. Many of these are already in the third or fourth generations. So this marriage and family life, I think, is one of the important positive policy in the isolation because they were allowed to become normal and procreate and develop their descendants. The residents or the patients themselves struggled and have their own dreams, have their own life to live, even in isolation. All these events had been captured and preserved and put into an exhibit during the centennial celebrations of Culion in May of 2006. Exhibitions presented in this 100 years of Culion journey features various chapters highlighting segregation and isolation, the resulting community life, the care of children, as well as its achievements and contributions in national and international leprosy research and treatment. This centennial marker marks where the first batch of patients landed in Culion. Today, we have the Culion Museum and Archives that becomes the repository of Culion heritage, of Culion culture, and of Culion history. It is indeed important not to forget the history of Culion. And in this Culion Museum, it showed the pursuit of science and institution to find cure of leprosy. It shows the struggle of patients to maintain identity, human dignity, and humanity. It showed the social impact of the public policy of isolation, confinement, and segregation. The power and resilience of human spirit in face of neglect, in despair and suffering physically and mentally. In building community of man amidst indifference, uncertainty, and abnormality. It shows the lesson that such public policy should never be repeated. Today, Culion is a new Culion. It is now a new municipality in the province of Palawan. And the Culion Hospital is now a general hospital. After 100 years of struggle, history of Culion is a history of transformation. Transformations of the island, transformations of the hospital, and transformations of the people. Culion now is a new municipality, a paradise regained. I would like to acknowledge the support of the Nippon Foundation and the Sakawe Moral Health Foundation in our journey for preserving leprosy history and memories. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kunanen. And now I'm calling upon Mr. Arturo Custodio Moreira de Souza, who is the National Coordinator of the Movement for Reintegration of Persons Affected by Hansen's Disease, to speak to us.
Boa tarde a todos, todas.
皆様こんにちは。
Good afternoon, everybody. To be able to meet you, I am a lucky man. I'm very happy. The T-shirt that I'm wearing does bear the name of there's a dome, memorial dome, and that's designed on my T-shirt. Our activities has a history of 33 years, and I've been involved in 30 years out of 33. Perhaps you've heard this over and over again, but Brazil can tell a great deal of stories, many stories regarding leprosy. Even among Brazil, things happen very differently. And the north, northeast, and center, and those places are doing better. Our history, compared to yours, not very different, I don't think. In Brazil as well, we had mandatory, and we have a medical police, and they will come and they will take them away by force. This is São Paulo, and these are the pictures you see. São Paulo colony had the most segregatory and discriminatory policy taken here. As you see here, you probably understand, but during the war, this is like pictures like taken under the Nazi regime during the Second World War. These are pictures that tell that segregation policy has been taken everywhere around the world, not just in Brazil. You will see probably similar pictures. The distribution of colonies in Brazil. We have to work together, and I think two things can be done. To do away with leprosy altogether. And the other is to tag our history, learn about the history. I mean, many of the colonies do not exist anymore. Last year, 3 colonies were closed, one of which do not exist at all physically. And these are some of the areas where history will be preserved. The 7 colonies will preserve the history, of which 5 we are directly involved. Our organization and what you see here is the government policy. And some of them are protected as legacy. One of which, this is the protection from the local governments. And the other 2, it's for the federal government's protection. So 1 receives local and 2 receives federal protection. What Mohan is doing is to protect the history. We started some time ago, and we had a national conference where we got all the inmates of all the colonies, and that's where it all started, to preserve our history and legacy. Bacurau, he was the person who started it all. And we have a virtual museum, a Bacurau museum. And we have the house of Bacurau. So it all started with that national conference. What you're seeing is these are the historical academicians who are involved very much in preserving history and legacy. So they have created a list of things that should be protected as legacy. we are fighting for the human rights of people affected by leprosy. These are buildings that are protected by public money, but they are being destroyed because of time. And so with the destruction of the architecture, we may lose the legacy. But those who came to that conference decided there have been recreation and sports that have taken places in those colonies, and they wanted that to be part of the legacy.
Se a gente não cria para eles uma nova missão, o que eles vão servir? Porque senão não tem como preservar prédios se a gente não tiver algum tipo de trabalho a ser realizado neles.
Some of the big problems, as you see here in the picture, this is 1,750 when the hospital was erected. So how do we preserve that hospital? We need to give it a new mission, new objective in order to preserve that. It's very difficult to keep such an old edifice, old building, without a new mission. Most important issue is the record of personal histories. We've heard some personal histories in this conference today, but it is true those personal histories, we have to find ways of doing that if we can't meet them in person to collect those.
Por exemplo, aqui é uma iniciativa em Minas Gerais, lá na colônia onde o Thiago reside, em que a gente pretende recuperar uma ruína e transformá-la como centro cultural e também de museu.
What you see now, going back to history again, the pictures are moving away, but this is in Miserere. This is where the colony was. And they have been destroyed physically, so how do we keep them? They are important.
No Brasil, das 1.700 pessoas vivas, praticamente 2.000 já faleceram nos últimos 7 anos.
Some of the cemeteries are also part of that. 8,600 people. About 2,000 have died in the last 7 years. So we need to keep in mind that we have to hurry up in keeping the legacy. And the second generation children, what about their future?
Relacionando com a colônia jansense. Então, essas interações das colônias também precisam ser levantadas nessas histórias.
One of the most important things, and we talked about what do we do about the second generation. In Rio Grande do Sul second story museum, there is a corner in that museum. The colony and also the Japanese who have, there is a Japanese colony, and hopefully we will retain that legacy in that one corner.
As pessoas escondem em vez de mostrarem. Então a gente tem muita dificuldade de preservar a memória quando uma realidade que precisa ser escondida. Se pudéssemos pedir alguma coisa aqui hoje, talvez fosse importante que um dos apelos globais fosse um apelo global reunindo historiadores, ou um apelo global também reunindo profissionais da hanseníase e preservá-la. Obrigado.
The human rights, and when the human rights is not respected, the government would like to erase that, so it is very difficult under that circumstance to preserve the reality and the truth. And if you are to ask all of you here in the global appeal, hopefully you will invite the historical academicians, not just the historical academicians, but maybe mass media people and people that can help us create and sustain the legacy in visual manner as well.
We have 4 minutes left. Thank you very much, Artur. I would like to exercise my prerogative as facilitator to pose 3 questions, both to the panel and to the audience. How can we honour the memory of the lives of the people who are isolated? What are the greatest obstacles that these people who have custodianship for these sites, what are the greatest obstacles that they personally face in preserving these histories? And what do they recommend that we do to assist? So I'd like them to spend half a minute answering that and then throw it open to the audience to perhaps suggest possibilities to solutions. So if Mr. Hirasawa and Mr. Kuru would like to respond first.
First of all, the prejudice and discrimination amongst the family members first need to be eliminated. I think family members of the leprosy-affected people need to regain their normal life. I am engaged in this work. And my family members say, when you appear on the TV, we feel very shocked and it really shortened our lives. So please stop appearing on the TV. But I don't think they should feel that way. I think we need to change the environment so that they don't feel freaked out as they see me on TV. So family members were mentioned. Why family members are so afraid that the leprosy-affected people would appear on TV? I think it's not about family. I think the society needs to change first. So to this end, we need to educate people more. We need to be tenacious in communicating and soliciting understanding amongst community members. So, I don't really have the simple answer as to what we should do and what will be the outcome. However, in order to figure out our ways, we need to first think about what is the memories that we would like to hand down to next generations, what will be the lessons that we would like to communicate. And Mr. Hirasawa often say that children are more flexible than adults. But each one of us in the society must be given an opportunity to be exposed to this issue. That is why we established our museum.
Joe?
Beg your pardon?
Shall I answer all 3 together?
Do your best.
Okay. I have very limited time, so I got to be in a hurry. The first question is, how can we honor the people detained or isolated in the colony? We can honor these people by preserving their history, because their history as an individual person or history of the place is the history of our people, is the history of people and the history of society. By preserving this history, we will know that public policies regarding isolation and segregations has existed, that people and human beings have suffered, have persevered, have dreamed, And this showed courage and humane spirit to survive amidst isolations and suffering. We can honor these people by preserving this history for the younger generations like in Culion, so that they will know and understand their roots and identity. We need to preserve leprosy history and memories such that never again that such policy should be repeated for other communicable and misunderstood disease. The greatest obstacle that are being met today by preservation efforts is the lack of appreciation and understanding of government and private institution, academe, and civil society of the need and importance to preserve leprosy history and memories. The lack of funding support to carry out the preservation effort and sustain the activity. The lack of capacity, particularly technical expertise and support, to start, maintain the preservation activities. One of these obstacles would be the essence of time in generating oral history and memories. As we all know, as in Japan, it's an aging population of the residents. We have to act now before we lose them by natural attritions or by death. My recommendations for the preservation's effort is to sensitize government, national government, and international bodies and agencies on the importance and urgency of preservations of leprosy history and memories. A global declaration on the preservations of leprosy history and memories should be developed and should be launched. To establish and pursue the development of a web-based global network that would link countries implementing and embarking the preservations of leprosy history and memories. Lastly, it is recommended to organize and find venue for the presentation of preservations of leprosy history activities, like inclusion of these preservations of leprosy history and memories in the annual global appeal on the World Leprosy Day. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And Artur, I've received notice that our time is up. You have one sentence.
Na verdade, é só trazer uma preocupação da gente formar uma aliança global que ajude a nós, no Brasil, por exemplo, a proteger um prédio que for destruído em Culião, ameaça um prédio, ameaça a história no Brasil. A segunda questão é a necessidade, talvez, da gente ter um catálogo disso, né, de todas essas colônias no mundo todo, que a gente pudesse estar trocando informações. E, por último, pensar em novos atores. Acho que novos atores estão relacionados, por exemplo, aos filhos separados. O que a gente viu no Brasil é que os filhos separados, eles, só de poderem estar discutindo essas questões, eles estão se tornando uma grande força, eles estão potencializando, eles estão crescendo com isso, não tendo vergonha dessa história. E os outros atores que eu digo é trazer, por exemplo, pessoas dos direitos humanos, historiadores, que possam, juntos conosco, estarem formando esses sítios de memória, né? Porque muitos desses sítios foram formados ou por movimento social, ou por médicos, ou por enfermeiras. A gente precisa trazer novos atores para essa discussão.
We have concerns. So first, we should establish global alliance. Maybe if the building is demolished in Culion, it will have impact in Brazil. Therefore, we need to share information. We need to exchange information. To this end, maybe we should create some kind of catalog to record the leprosy-related information. And also, we need to find new players, such as separated children, second generation, based on Brazil experience, in order to discuss their situation, their issues. They need to look back on history, their own history, without shame. So we are trying to improve the potential amongst the younger generation. Another player could be historians and also advocates of human rights. We need to involve those people, and we need to join hands to preserve the history and the site related to leprosy. I think it will be the part of a social movement, and we should preserve the assets as a cultural asset, historical assets. So we need a global cooperation.
So thank you for listening. Thank you for being involved in this. And I'd like us all to consider our collective responsibility for the history of leprosy. Thank you.